Folks, we are leaving California, and honestly, it's pretty heartbreaking for me. I grew up here. I was born in Burbank, California at St. Joe's. I went to school at Edison Elementary, and I went to middle school at Walter Reed. My family moved to North Hollywood when I was 11, and I've lived within like a 1.5 mile radius ever since. My kids were all born here, and now I am taking off, and we at the Daily Wire are taking our 75 jobs with us. Here are 5 reasons I'm taking my family and my company and leaving the most beautiful state in the country. Number 1, quality of life. So when my family moved to North Hollywood, it was a safe, clean suburb. Yes, LA always had a serious litter and homeless problem, but those problems were pretty much relegated to downtown or specific areas of the city. And then it was the task of the city, you would think, to clean up those areas. Instead, they decided to allow all those problems to explode into nearly every incorporated area of LA. In 2019, there were nearly 60,000 homeless people living in LA County. In 2011, there were less than 40,000. So we've increased by 50% in less than 10 years. These are people, many of whom are mentally ill or drug addicted. But thanks to local regulations and legal consent decrees, the police have been told they are literally not allowed to move them to dry out facilities or do anything with the trash that now strews every sidewalk and underpass and overpass and embankment in LA. Every single one. Every freeway underpass is now a tent city. In fact, they've been building porta potties and like hand washing stations in these tent cities under the freeway underpasses. Nearly every public space has become a repository of open waste and needles and trash. The most beautiful areas of LA have become wrecks. It's one thing to pay exorbitant taxes. It's another thing to pay exorbitant taxes to watch your city degrade into a hellhole. I mean, here's just a few stories from the last few weeks. So my wife and I decide that we're going to take our kids down to Santa Monica, right? One of the most beautiful areas in America. And I'm old enough to remember when it was a beautiful, clean area. No longer. We take them down to a park. My kids are playing. They wander up a hill a little bit. And my daughter, who's 6, comes running down to me and she says, "Daddy, there's a homeless man, and he is doing something to his arm." What was he doing to his arm? Well, he had a needle. I'll let you guess. That same trip, we are walking along the boardwalk, and there's just a homeless man, no shirt, screaming at a bunch of people eating at a restaurant. Just screaming at them. And nobody in sight doing anything about the harassment. And this is how it is over in Venice, on Venice Beach, Santa Monica. I mean, it's been really, really bad over there. Outside my house, I live in a fairly nice area. I mean, I've seen a homeless person face down outside my home. I mean, it's terrible. It's terrible. Not for us. It's terrible for this guy. How is that sympathy for the guy? He is lying face down in the gutter. And my children have seen people peeing on walls. My kids have seen open needles. Last month alone, and I'm just going to talk about what's happened to our company. Our head of social media was threatened with a crossbow by a homeless man. I mean, I don't even know how that happens, a crossbow. Is he a refugee from 1392? A homeless person tried to bash in the front windows of our office. Just last week, we had a homeless person going through our trash. Again, none of this is lack of sympathy for the homeless. It's about having a policy that protects tax-paying citizens, their quality of life, making sure they can be safe, and make sure that people who need care can actually get the care they need. But California doesn't do any of that. Okay, 2, taxes. Yes, tax rates matter, you idiots. California's top marginal income tax rate is now 13.3%, which is already one of the highest in the nation. The legislature is actively discussing raising it to 16.8%. which on top of federal taxation means that if you're in the top tax bracket, you're paying 54% of your income to the federal and state government. California has historically low property taxes because of Prop 13, but the legislature is now seeking to remove all the Prop 13 restrictions, raising them first on commercial properties and then presumably later on residential properties. California's legislature has been considering a wealth tax, which taxes you based on non-liquid assets, which means you could be paying more in tax than you actually have in yearly income, and they want to have that wealth tax trail you for 10 years after you leave the state. This is not counting the 1% disability insurance payments of taxable wages, the statewide 7.25% sales tax, the 50-cent gas tax per gallon, and a myriad of other local taxes that drain your wallet, all for the privilege of living in a state that can't keep the streets clean or the park safe. 3, crime. Crime in LA has been skyrocketing. Well, shockingly, when you decide to basically release the streets to people who commit crime, crime has been going badly. The police have been told to back off of crime. In late July, LAPD Chief Michael Moore said the city had seen a 14% increase in homicide. For years, the state of California has pursued catch and release crime fighting, declassifying certain crimes as crimes, devolving responsibility to counties and cities. They called it prison realignment to avoid culpability at the state level, basically releasing people who should be in jail onto the streets. This has been going on for years at the local level too. In fact, local law enforcement has basically been incentivized to lie about their own crime rates. In 2014, the LAPD reported they'd misclassified over 1,200 violent crimes as minor offenses. And then they say, hey, look, we lowered the crime rate. Magic. It was not a giant surprise when the LAPD was ordered to let the city burn in Black Lives Matter riots that shut down LA County for a full week. We were all told to stay in our homes past 6 p.m. Rodeo Drive, the nicest area of LA, was forced to close at 1 p.m. to allow the mostly peaceful protesters to have their way. This garbage has real consequences. Down the street, I have a friend who is building a house. Beautiful house. He has had, in the last month alone, the structure robbed twice, once of copper piping, and the dumpster out front was set completely on fire. His wife has been stalked by a homeless person back to that person's front door. Just a block further down, another friend's house has been robbed by 3 people. He scared them off. The police came. They told him he couldn't do anything about it because they didn't have the manpower. Again, I don't live in a bad area. I live in a pretty decent area. 4, bad policymaking. So the bad policymaking in California is just nuts. From regulations designed to crush businesses, the legislature has already passed a bill requiring publicly traded companies in the state to staff their boards with diversity hires. So now the state's going to dictate who's on your board. To the insanity of the education system where kids can't learn to read. I mean, literally don't know how to read, but they're taught leftist propaganda from kindergarten. To the bias against religious institutions, the one-party state here is impeded only by occasional uncomfortable realities. There's a reason that CEO Magazine, after surveying 650 CEOs, named California the worst state in America to do business. If you see our HR department, you'll know. Organized labor runs the government in California. That means running up insane levels of debt on the taxpayer dime. Most obviously, California's COVID policy has been utterly unhinged. All of the nicest things in California have been shut down for months without data to support these kinds of shutdowns. So, for example, Disney World, it's open in Florida. It's been open for a few months in Florida with precautions. They've been doing it safely, no outbreaks. Disneyland is still shut. They've been begging the governor to let them open. Nope. Restaurants have opened all over the country with limited capacity. Indoor dining is still prohibited in large swaths of the state. Schools are opening everywhere, not in LA. And if you're a private school and you want to take precautions, the state will crack down on you. In fact, our local Jewish day school, they were told they could only operate as a camp, as a summer camp. If they did a summer camp in the school, it was fine. If they taught the kids, then it was a problem. Then suddenly it became unsafe for COVID. 5th, and finally, it's not getting better. There is no resurgence anywhere on the horizon. The politics becomes more skewed every single day. This is a one-party state. Right now, the state assembly is controlled by Democrats, 61-17. Okay, the state, governed like garbage. In LA County, we have like a 17% unemployment rate. The state assembly is controlled 61-17. Republicans have not held the majority in the state assembly since 1996. People who can afford to leave are leaving. In 2019, before the pandemic, before the riots, out-migration jumped 38%. That was rising for the 7th straight year. So here's the deal. I want my kids to grow up safe. I'd love for them to grow up in a community that actually has a future. I'd love for them to grow up knowing their labor won't be robbed from them or from us, that their freedoms aren't going to be destroyed by the government, that their quality of life will be better than the one that I grew up with. That's not going to happen in California. So we are out. Last rational person out, turn out the lights.